All right. So, you sent in this article,
Mm-hmm.
Anti-Blackness and the Betrayal of America.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, the title kind of threw me off a little.
Right.
But I started digging into it.
Yeah.
And it really got me thinking, about how messed up
Uh-huh.
some of our history is. And
Yeah.
we're going to unpack how policies that were really designed
Yeah.
to hurt Black Americans actually ended up
Right.
hurting a lot of other people too.
Mm.
So we're gonna dive into some wild examples in this deep dive.
Okay.
Social Security, labor unions,
Uh-huh.
the war on drugs,
Right.
even that welfare queen stereotype.
Yeah.
So to kick things off,
Okay.
can you help me understand this whole divide and conquer strategy?
Yeah.
It sounds like something out of, a movie or something.
Right.
But the article argues that it's been a real tactic
It has been a real tactic
throughout history.
used very effectively throughout history.
So how does that even work?
It's pretty straightforward. You pit groups against each other. Right. And they're less likely to band together to demand things that would benefit all of them.
Right.
And historically, race has been
Yeah.
a very powerful tool to create that division.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy how effective that is.
Yeah.
So let's jump into the first example.
Okay.
Social Security. I always thought of Social Security as this universal program, a
Right.
safety net for everyone.
Yeah.
But the article points out that the original Social Security Act
Yeah.
left out a huge chunk of the workforce.
Yeah.
Farm workers and domestic workers.
A lot of people.
And in the South, back in the 1930s,
Right.
those jobs were mostly held
But Black Americans.
by Black Americans. Yeah. So Southern Democrats who pretty much ran things down there
Right.
really fought hard
Yeah.
to keep those workers out of Social Security.
Well, I mean, I get that they were hardcore segregationists and all.
But weren't they kind of shooting themselves in the foot?
That's the irony of it all.
Yeah.
Their own white constituents
Right.
would have benefited from a more robust Social Security program.
Exactly.
But they were so obsessed
Yeah.
with maintaining that racial hierarchy,
Right.
with keeping Black people
Yeah.
economically dependent,
Uh-huh.
that they were willing to hurt their own white constituents in the process.
So they chose a smaller pie for everyone?
Yes.
Just to make sure that Black people got the smallest slice?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the cruelty of it.
That's messed up.
Yeah.
And the article mentions this book,
Yeah.
When Affirmative Action Was White,
Great book.
which says that this wasn't just limited to the South.
No, not at all.
It digs into how race shaped these New Deal programs.
Across the board.
Wow.
Yeah, Ira Katznelson,
Okay.
the author,
Yeah.
argues that a lot of these seemingly race-neutral policies
All right.
actually benefited white Americans at the expense of Black Americans. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so Social Security check.
Great.
Let's move on to labor unions.
Okay.
I've always thought of unions as fighting for the rights of all workers,
Right.
but the article claims that businesses actually used race
He did.
to weaken unions.
Right.
And that ultimately hurt all workers.
All workers, yeah.
How does that even work?
Well, think about it.
Okay.
During the early days of the labor movement,
Right.
racial tensions were really high.
Mm-hmm.
Companies, especially in the South,
Yeah.
started using race as this wedge issue.
Okay.
They spread this idea that unions were trying to integrate workplaces,
Right.
or that they would give Black workers preferential treatment.
Oh, so they were preying on people's
Exactly.
racial anxiety.
Racial anxieties.
Yeah.
And sometimes they were just straight up lying.
Wow.
There's this example from the South called Operation Dixie,
Operation Dixie.
where companies spread all sorts of false information about unions.
To scare white workers.
So by playing on those racial fears,
Yeah.
companies were able to weaken unions, which then led to lower wages,
Right.
worse working conditions,
Uh-huh.
and less power for all workers,
Less power for everyone.
white, Black,
Yep.
everyone in between.
That's right.
It's like a domino effect.
It is a domino effect.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that this was happening,
Right.
in the Jim Crow South,
Exactly.
where racial segregation was the law of the land.
The law.
So
Yeah.
for a lot of white workers back then,
Yeah.
the idea of integrated workplaces was really threatening,
Very threatening.
and companies exploited that fear
To their advantage.
to their advantage. Yeah. It's amazing how they're able to manipulate people like that.
Like it is.
Okay, so we've got Social Security.
Okay.
We got labor unions. This next one is particularly relevant given all the talk about mass incarceration these days, the war on drugs. I know this had a devastating impact on Black communities.
Absolutely.
But the article argues that it also harmed
other groups
as well.
Can you unpack that a little?
Yeah, the war on drugs. It's a complex issue.
Right.
And while it wasn't explicitly about race, the way it was carried out had a deeply racialized impact. For instance, you had this media frenzy around the so-called crack epidemic, which was often portrayed as this problem unique to Black communities, even though drug use was happening everywhere.
Of course.
Yeah, and then you had those ridiculously harsh sentencing disparities between crack and powder cocaine. Crack, which was more prevalent in Black communities, carried much harsher penalties than powder cocaine, which was more common among white and wealthier folks. And then there's
this whole issue of Nixon's Southern strategy.
Okay, now that's a term I've heard thrown around.
Yeah.
But I'll admit I'm a little fuzzy on the details. Can you give like a quick rundown of what that was all about?
Sure. Basically, it was a political strategy used by Richard Nixon to win over white voters in the South who were traditionally Democrats, but were increasingly opposed to the civil rights movement. He used this coded language talking about things like law and order, states' rights, to appeal to their racial anxieties without explicitly mentioning race.
So it was all about tapping into that underlying resentment without actually saying it out loud.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that strategy had a lasting impact, not just on electoral politics, but on criminal justice policy as well. It helped lay the groundwork for the war on drugs.
Which, as we were discussing, had a disproportionate impact on Black communities.
Yes.
But you were saying that this wasn't just about Black communities, right?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
While Black communities were disproportionately targeted, the ripple effects of mass incarceration were felt across racial lines.
Wow.
Especially in Latino and poor white communities. Families torn apart. Communities destabilized. And generations of people struggling with the stigma of a criminal record.
It's like this massive web of interconnected consequences.
Yes. And it all stems from this exploitation of racial fear and resentment.
And that brings us to another powerful example.
Okay.
The welfare queen stereotype.
All right.
Oh, this one makes my blood boil.
I know.
It's just so blatantly racist and inaccurate.
It is.
This image of the lazy Black woman living high on the hog-off government handouts.
Driving a Cadillac. With food stamps. You know.
It's just, ugh.
It was a very powerful image. And it was used very effectively to undermine support for social safety net programs. But here's the thing. Most people who relied on welfare at the time were actually white.
Wait, seriously?
Yes.
So they basically took this real issue of, you know, people needing assistance. And then slapped this racist caricature on top of it to turn public opinion against the whole program.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the article points to Ronald Reagan's presidency. The key moment in this strategy. He often used coded language. Talking about welfare cheats. Strapping young bucks. Buying steak with food stamps.
All imagery that evoked those racist stereotypes. Without explicitly mentioning race.
Without ever saying the word.
It was a masterclass in dog whistling.
It was.
And the sad part is, it worked. Those programs were slashed.
It was.
And it wasn't just Black families who suffered. Poor and working class families. With all races felt the impact.
Of all races felt the impact. And those cuts to programs like aid, to families with dependent children, or AFDC, which primarily helped single mothers, had long-lasting consequences.
We're still dealing with the fallout today.
We are.
Wow. You know, I was skeptical when we started this, but the more we unpack these examples, the more I see this pattern emerging. It's like anti-Blackness has been used as this weapon.
It has.
You know, not just to hurt Black communities, but to hold back progress that could benefit everyone.
That could benefit everyone.
That's crazy.
It is.
Okay, so let's take a break here. Then in part 2, we'll delve into those more recent examples and see how this all connects to the issues we're grappling with today. So we just looked at some pretty heavy stuff about how anti-Blackness was used to undermine policies that could have benefited everyone. And I'm ready to have my mind blown some more.
Okay.
What other examples does the article give of this happening maybe in more recent times?
It's almost like you can pick any major policy debate in the U.S. And you'll find these same dynamics at play.
Interesting.
Like healthcare, for example.
Healthcare?
Yeah.
Really? I wouldn't have immediately connected that to this whole anti-Blackness thing.
Well, think about it.
Okay.
The U.S. is pretty much the only developed country without universal health care.
Right.
And one of the biggest roadblocks has always been this fear of socialized medicine.
Right, like it's some kind of communist plot or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the article argues that this fear has been deliberately stoked by linking universal health to these existing programs like Medicaid.
Which, of course, serves a lot of low-income folks.
Right.
A disproportionate number of whom are Black and brown. So even though universal health care could benefit everyone by associating it with these groups, it becomes less appealing to some white voters.
To some white voters, yes.
It's that stigmatization thing again, right?
Yeah.
If something is seen as benefiting Black people, it suddenly becomes bad or undesirable, even if it would help others too.
Even if it would help others too.
It's crazy.
And it's not just healthcare.
Oh,
You see similar dynamics in education, too.
Okay.
Think about the resistance to things like school integration.
Oh, yeah.
And affirmative action.
Yeah, those are always hot-button issues.
They are.
The argument is usually that they're unfair to white students.
Right. But studies have shown that diverse learning environments actually benefit all students.
Yeah.
Not just students of color.
Right.
And affirmative action at its core is about leveling the playing field.
Right.
Addressing historical inequities.
But those facts often get lost in the rhetoric.
They do.
Right? It becomes this zero-sum game where any gains for one group are seen as a loss for another.
Exactly. And that's exactly the kind of thinking that this divide and conquer strategy thrives on.
Right.
It's about pitting groups against each other instead of focusing on solutions that would benefit everyone.
You know, it's starting to feel a bit like a matrix.
Right.
Like there are these inviolable forces shaping our perceptions and preventing us from creating a better society.
Well, the article argues that these forces aren't really invisible.
Okay.
They're deeply ingrained in our institutions, our policies, even our cultural norms.
Yeah.
And they continue to operate in ways that we might not always recognize.
So it's not just about like overt racism. It's about these subtle biases and fears that are constantly being exploited. Okay, that's pretty depressing.
It is.
But the article doesn't just leave us with this bleak outlook, right?
No, it offers some ways to break the cycle.
So what does it suggest we do?
Well, it starts with recognizing the common humanity that binds us all together. It's about understanding that these systems of oppression ultimately harm everyone, even those who might benefit from them in the short term.
Okay, so how do we actually put that into practice?
It's tough.
Yeah.
But the article highlights the importance of building multiracial coalitions.
Okay.
It argues that we can't achieve lasting change without solidarity across racial lines.
So instead of being pitted against each other, we need to find common ground.
Exactly.
And work together. That's easier said than done.
Much easier said than done.
Yeah, what would that even look like in practice?
Well, it means being willing to listen and learn from each other's experiences.
Okay.
Understanding how these systems of oppression operate in different ways for different groups.
And recognizing that our liberation is bound up with each other's liberation.
It is.
It's a powerful idea.
It is.
But it's a lot easier said than done.
It is.
Yeah.
It takes a conscious effort to break down those barriers, to step outside of our own comfort zones, and engage with people who are different from us.
And it's not just about individual relationships, right?
No, it's about changing the systems that perpetuate these inequalities.
So the article suggests supporting policies and movements
Uh-huh.
that promote racial and economic justice.
Exactly.
Things like criminal justice reform, affordable housing, quality education for all. Those are all huge issues.
They are.
Where do we even begin?
It can feel overwhelming. I know.
Yeah.
But even small actions can make a difference.
Like what?
You can start by getting involved in your local community.
Okay.
There are probably organizations already working on these issues. Right where you live. Donate your time. Okay. Your money.
Yeah.
Or just show up.
Yeah.
And lend your support.
What about on like a national level?
Well, one of the most important things you can do is vote.
Right.
Make sure you're registered. Educate yourself about the candidates.
Right.
And their positions on these issues.
Okay.
And then cast your ballot.
Yeah.
For those who are committed to dismantling these systems of oppression.
Okay, so voting, supporting organizations, getting involved in my community. It's a start, right?
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that this is a marathon, not a sprint. Change takes time. And it's going to be an ongoing process.
But it's a process worth fighting for.
It is.
You know, I'm starting to see how all of this is connected. How dismantling anti-Blackness isn't just about racial justice. It's about creating a better future.
It is, for everyone.
That's the key takeaway, I think. We all have a stake in creating a more just and equitable society. And the first step is recognizing how these systems of oppression are designed to keep us divided and prevent us from achieving that goal.
You know, we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
But I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
We have.
There's so much more to explore here.
There is.
Well, the article does offer some specific strategies.
It does.
For dismantling these systems and building a more just world.
Right.
Maybe we can dive into those.
Okay.
In the next part of our deep dive.
Let's do it.
This conversation has been eye-opening.
Good.
And I'm definitely ready to hear more
all
about how we can be a part of the solution.
That's good.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive into anti-Blackness and the betrayal of America. And we've talked about how policies designed to harm Black Americans ended up hurting a lot of other folks too. And how these tactics are still at play today.
They are.
But I want to shift gears a little.
Okay.
Let's talk about solutions.
All right.
What can we actually do about all of this?
Well, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of the problem.
Right.
But the article actually offers some pretty concrete strategies for creating a more just world.
Right.
And it all starts with looking inward.
Looking inward.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
We need to become more aware of our own biases.
Okay.
We all have them, whether we realize it or not. And those biases can influence how we see the world, how we treat others.
Even the policies we support.
Okay, I'll admit that makes me a little uncomfortable.
Sure.
I like to think of myself as a pretty open-minded person. But I guess what you're saying is that even well-intentioned people can have these hidden biases.
Exactly. It's not about being a bad person.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that we've all been shaped by a society that's steeped in racism.
Right.
And those messages, those stereotypes, they seep into our subconscious.
Wow.
Whether we like it or not.
So how do we even become aware of those biases?
Well,
they're hidden, right?
It takes a willingness to be introspective.
Okay.
To really examine your beliefs. And where they came from. Ask yourself some tough questions.
Okay, like?
Why do I react a certain way to a certain group of people? Where did those ideas come from?
Right.
There are also some great resources online.
Okay.
That can help you identify implicit bias.
Okay, so let's say I do some soul searching.
Right.
And I realize, crap, I do have some biases.
Yeah.
Then what awareness is one thing.
Right.
But how do I actually change my behavior?
That's where the real work begins.
Oh, okay.
It's about actively challenging racist ideas and behaviors.
Okay.
Whenever you encounter them.
So
whether it's a joke, a comment, or a policy that perpetuates inequality.
Yeah.
We need to speak up.
So it's not enough to just be not racist.
Right.
We need to be actively anti-racist.
Exactly. And that can be tough.
Right.
It means having those uncomfortable conversations with friends, family coworkers, even strangers.
Wow.
Calling out racism, even when it's subtle or unintentional.
I can see how that would be hard.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel like we're not equipped
Right.
to have those conversations, or that we'll just make things worse.
It's definitely a learning process.
Okay.
Right.
And there are ways to approach these conversations constructively.
Right.
But the main thing is to not stay silent.
Right.
Silence is complicity. If we're not part of the solution, we're part of the problem.
Okay, I'm hearing you. Speak up. Challenge racism.
Yeah.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
What else can we do to dismantle these systems of oppression?
The article stresses the importance of supporting organizations and movements that are already fighting for racial and economic justice.
Right.
There are groups doing incredible work on the ground, and they need our support.
Right. Putting our money and our time where our mouths are.
Exactly. And when you're looking for organizations to support, I think it's important to prioritize those that are led by and accountable to the communities they serve.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that the voices of those most impacted are at the forefront of these movements.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the political arena.
Right.
We need to advocate for policies that promote racial and economic justice.
Okay, so things like?
That could mean contacting our elected officials to support legislation that addresses things like mass incarceration, police brutality, affordable housing, quality education for all.
So we need to be politically engaged?
Yes.
Use our voices to demand change from our leaders.
And that includes voting.
Of course.
Making sure you're registered.
Right.
Educating yourself on the candidates and their positions on these issues.
Okay.
And then casting your ballot.
Yeah.
For those who are committed to dismantling these systems of oppression.
Okay, so we've talked about individual actions.
Right.
Becoming aware of our biases. Challenging racism.
Yeah.
Supporting organizations. Advocating for just policies.
Right.
But what about those bigger systems?
Right.
Those entrenched structures that perpetuate inequality?
That's a huge question.
Yeah, how do we tackle those?
That's where things get even more complex.
Right.
But the article points to a few key areas where systemic change is desperately needed.
Like what?
One is the criminal justice system, which we've already talked about quite a bit.
We talked about how the war on drugs disproportionately impacted Black and brown communities.
Right.
What concrete changes need to happen there?
Well, we need to end mass incarceration, for one.
Okay.
That means ending the over-policing of Black and brown communities.
Right.
Reforming sentencing guidelines.
Okay.
And investing in restorative justice programs.
So shifting away from punishment.
Yes.
And toward rehabilitation and community healing.
Exactly.
And we also need to address police brutality head-on.
Absolutely.
What does that look like?
That means holding police accountable for their actions, demilitarizing police forces, and investing in community-based solutions to crime.
Okay, those are big changes.
They are.
What about other areas?
Education is another critical area.
Okay.
We need to ensure that all students have access to quality education, regardless of their race or zip code.
Yeah.
That means investing in early childhood education, providing equitable funding for schools, and diversifying the teaching workforce.
So breaking down those barriers
exactly
that prevent children of color from reaching their full potential.
And then there's the issue of the racial wealth gap.
Right.
We need policies that create economic opportunities and level the playing field.
So things like?
That could mean investing in affordable housing.
Okay.
Creating pathways to home ownership for people of color.
Right.
Supporting Black-owned businesses.
It's about creating a system
where
everyone has a chance to thrive. Not just a select few.
Not just a select few.
And these are just a few examples, of course.
Well, of course.
But the main takeaway is that dismantling these systems of oppression is going to require a multifaceted approach.
It will.
It needs individuals taking action, organizations fighting for change, and policies that promote justice.
Absolutely.
And it's going to require a fundamental shift.
It is.
In our thinking.
A fundamental shift.
Yeah.
We need to move away from this idea of a zero-sum game where one group's progress comes at the expense of another.
We need to embrace the idea
We do.
that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
That our liberation is bound up with each other's liberation.
That's right.
And that when we fight for justice for Black communities, we're ultimately fighting for justice.
We are.
For all.
For everyone.
Wow. This has been an incredibly powerful and thought-provoking deep dive. I have to say, I started out skeptical.
I know.
But you've really opened my eyes to how these issues are connected and how important it is for all of us to get involved.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And honestly, I've learned a lot from this conversation, too.
Me too.
It's a reminder that this work is never done.
Right.
And that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world.
So to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey.
Thank you.
We hope this conversation has inspired you to learn more, to get involved, and to be a part of the solution.
It's up to all of us.
Remember, change starts with each of us.
It does.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep fighting for a better world.
That's right.